the World Bank estimates that businesses lose $29 billion yearly to poor electricity. The situation has resulted in the refusal of consumers to pay their bills, and also because the bills are not transparent and clear. The report shows that Nigerian utilities get paid for only half of electricity they receive, and that for every 10 naira worth of electricity received by the electricity distribution companies, those are the discos, about 2 naira 6 kobo is lost to poor distribution infrastructure and through power theft, while another 3 naira 4 kobo is not paid. 6 in 10 of registered customers are not metered, and the electricity bills are not transparent and clear. Well, it sounds like a complicated web, but the partner of tax, regulatory, and people services at KPMG Nigeria, Mr. Martins Aroge, will help us untangle this web. Good morning, Mr. Aroge, and thank you so much for coming on the show this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So what's your thoughts on the World Bank's report that businesses lose $29 billion because of power outages and the refusal of some customers to pay their bills?
It's not very surprising because the base of any successful business, one of the things that you would expect and you would take for a given if you want to run a successful business is that you would have access to power. And if you don't have access to power, then you then have to source that through alternative channels and alternative means. It would probably be very inefficient, especially when you look at the alternative systems that we have in place in Nigeria today. So it's not surprising that businesses are losing significant amount of money due to their inability to have access to regular and consistent power supply. So I'm not very surprised at those numbers.
Okay, Mr. Oroge, well, the privatization of the power sector was supposed to bring the much-needed solution, but now we hear questions on competence of the new private owners and whether they are the right fit for the sector. What is required to, achieve some measure of progress here?
First of all, before we begin to talk about whether the investors are the right fit, I think we also need to consider what's the environment which they've had to work, and what are the structures with which they've had to work, and whether they've been appropriate, and whether the structures and the environment have also been the right fit for the investors. But in terms of what we need to do, I think the answer isn't very perfect. It's investment. The sector has been in dire need of significant investment for years. There's been very, very, very little investment into upgrading the capital infrastructure that is necessary and required to deliver power to our homes in the way and manner that we would like, and the way and manner that we would be comfortable with. And if we don't make that right investment in the structure, then there is no way we will see the improvement we're looking for in the sector.
Well, we talk about investment, money has to be put in, and then we ask, where should the money come from? And then there's the issue of cost-reflective tariffs. Nigerians do not want to pay more without any visible improvement in the quality of service. So who will bail the cat now? Is it the chicken before the hen, or the hen before the chicken?
It's a typical catch-22 situation, and one who would need to find a way to unravel. Now, the challenge, again, like you pointed out, is the lack of cost-reflective tariffs in the system. For years, discos were made to sell power at a cost that was less than the price at which we were getting it from generating companies. That's not a sustainable model. Nigerians don't want to pay more until they see reliable power. And reliable power would only come when the discos have the ability to make investments in the infrastructure. Now, what you typically would say is, or expect, that the discos should be able to raise these funds from external sources. But when you look at the status and the situation in the sector, where nearly all the distribution companies are in a negative equity position, which means that they had losses that have eroded the amount of capital they put into the business at the get-go, then it becomes a lot more difficult to raise funding. They then also have issues around tariffs and MITO, and how we constantly have shifted the goalposts when it's come to both the major and the minor reviews of tariffs down the years. That has also impacted investor confidence. So if I was looking to put money somewhere, And I had an industry where I wasn't very certain of what government policies would be and how consistent they would be over time. I would be a bit reluctant to put money in. So it's also been very, very difficult for the discos to also seek for external source of funding to make this investment. I'm not sure that at the end of the day it's fair on customers to say pay cost reflective tariffs without a necessary improvement, and that's what we try to do with the service-based tariff, where the more power you get, the higher you're expected to pay. But again, the challenge is still there. Are people actually getting the amount of power that is reflected in the tariff? So when we look at band A, where people are expected to get more than 20 hours of power every day, is that what's really happening? And should those be classified as band A today, actually be band B, or maybe even band C, D, or E, based on the actual facts on ground? So it's a very, very difficult situation. Customers should not be expected to pay more until they can see an improvement in the quality of tariffs, in the quality of supply. But that funding has to come in. So it has to be something that government needs to work out and find a way to put in place a structure that allows this disco access funding. And the CBN is already working on something like that to help the disco get some measure of funding to make the necessary investment in the sector. The World Bank a few years ago also had put in place a program, the Power Sector Recovery Program, that was also supposed to address some of these issues, where the discos were able to access some form of funding over a period of time, with which they can then make the necessary investment in improving the quality of infrastructure. After which, when Nigerians begin to see that improvement, we can then begin to increase tariffs up onto the point where we can get cost-reflective tariffs. So it's that funding, and government needs to be very much involved, working with the CBN and the World Bank, as has been articulated in plans in the past, and ensuring that discos can access the funding, make that investment in infrastructure, and then we can see that improvement. It's also something very similar that the Siemens deal is also expected to accomplish improvements in transmission, improvement in distribution infrastructure. Because again, if you look at the status in the sector today, less than half of our generation capacity gets actually wheeled to customers. So if you can even have the ability to increase transmission and distribution capacity so that we can even access all of our generation capacity today, we would see a massive improvement in the quality of supply from customers.
All right. How does the application of value-added tax in the power sector today impact tariffs? And are there ways to tweak this application and subsequently reduce tariffs?
Yes, there is. VAT today is the cost. So when you hear that the tariffs you pay is say 50 naira per kilowatt hour, then you then add 7.5% on top of that tariff to get how much you actually would pay. Now, the question has always been, should we apply that additional 7.5% rather than pay it to government? Should we pay it over to the distribution companies and then ensure that they invest that funds in infrastructure development? Over time, there's been a lot of discussions around how you can tweak that and ensure that you take away that cost from consumers and use it to set up a fund that discos can then access and use for capital improvement in the sector. Sometime last year, government and Labour also worked out some kind of arrangement where the VAT would be applied towards providing subsidy for low-income consumers. But in terms of details of how that has actually worked, it's still unclear. So yes, there are ways you can work around the VAT question and see how you can apply that amount towards ensuring that there is some improvement in infrastructure.
Yeah, but what impact does the computation of minimum tax have on limited resources in the sector, and how can this money be better applied towards development of infrastructure?
It's a very, very difficult situation. Now, like I mentioned, the distribution companies in Nigeria, from when they were handed over to private investors, have not made real profits. They've all made very significant losses. But because of the rules we have in Nigeria today around the application of minimum tax, you still get to pay taxes even when you don't make profits. For some distribution companies, their tax bill last year alone ran into billions of naira. And these are companies that are not making money. These are companies that we are saying today don't even have the resources to invest in what is very critical to ensuring regular and consistent power supply, which is infrastructural development. Now, if you take $1 billion out of a business that isn't making money annually, you can imagine how that would impact the ability of that business to continue to survive, talk less of making investments. So the question is can government do something about that specifically for this industry? Now, we can say, hey, how do we guarantee that if we waive minimum tax for them, that they would spend that money in making investments? Maybe we may not be able to guarantee that. So is there a way we can work around a system that says, when we get this money from you, we can then give you that money to make that investment and monitor that process to ensure that the money doesn't get spent on some other items. But this money, when we give you that relief, is then spent on infrastructural development. But it's going to be very, very difficult if we expect them to continue to pay billions in taxes annually, even when they're not making profit, and then still expect them to find money from who knows where to make investments in infrastructural development.
Okay, how does the current net asset position of the businesses impact their ability to actually raise new capital?
Yes, now that's a very, very good question, because it's like someone who has a negative balance in his bank. So he has is owing his bank, and he goes to his bank and says, I would like to get more money from you. Now the bank is going to look at him and say, hang on a minute, the last one you took, you haven't been able to pay. I don't see any way you will be able to pay. So why should I give you more money? So that's the situation where these companies find themselves in terms of their equity position. They've had losses that have eroded their capital position. So they are primarily in a negative equity position. And that would always have an impact when you go to banks, when you go to investors, when you talk to finance houses and you say, I would like to get a bit more money. Everyone's going to look at you and say, you're not in a position to take money from me at this particular point in time. What's your plan, first of all, to get yourself to a reasonable position? And then it comes back to tariffs. And then I look at the tariff situation and I say, the last time there was supposed to be a minor tariff review, nothing happened. How am I sure that anything will change? And if I cannot guarantee that you'll be able to pay me back, then I'll be very reluctant to give you money. So that's the situation that these companies find themselves in terms of their capital position, their negative equity position today.
Wow, well, it doesn't sound like there's a direct solution to this. It all sounds so complicated with a lot of factors to take into consideration. But we'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Martin Saroge, for sharing your thoughts with us this morning and helping us to at least try to untangle the web between power financing and taxes. Mr. Martin Saroge is a partner, tax, regulatory and people services with KPMG Nigeria. Thank you so much, Mr. Saroge.
Thank you for having me.